At 45, the postmistress nobody courted was asked to wed the new cattle baron. The deed was wrong. Not by much. 37 acres on the north boundary had been surveyed off a creek bed that hadn't run water in 20 years, and the county had redrawn it twice without telling anybody. I'd ridden out to that corner post myself the second week I owned the Broken Horn, and I stood there with the paper in my hand and the wind coming hard across the flat, and I knew it was going to cost me. Knew the man who'd sold it to me knew too, and was probably already 3 counties east. I didn't say anything to anybody. That's the thing about coming into a place new. You carry your trouble alone until you know who's safe to carry it near. I'd bought the Broken Horn in late October. Drove 800 head up from the south in the worst of it. Lost 11 to a river crossing that went bad outside of Redbud Flat, and arrived in Crail County with dirt in every crease of me and a handshake agreement with a county recorder who turned out to be the seller's cousin. I was not what you'd call welcomed. The town of Ardmore set itself along one main street, a hotel, 2 saloons, a feed merchant, a church with a broken bell, and the post office, which was also the telegraph and the one place in Ardmore where a man could reliably find out what had happened in the world in the last 2 weeks. The postmistress ran all 3 functions by herself. Her name was Cecilia Prout, and she was 45 years old, same as me, though I didn't know that then. First time I walked in, I was there for a deed query, thought maybe there'd been a filing correction I hadn't seen. She was behind the counter sorting freight manifests, and she looked up, and she didn't do what most of the town did when they saw me, which was assess. She just looked at me plain, the way you'd look at a man who'd come in out of the cold and might need something. "Help you," she said. I told her what I needed. She took the deed number, turned to her ledger without any commentary, ran her finger down 3 pages and said, "That survey's been amended twice. First amendment didn't record. Second one did, 2 years back, but the correction plat never got sent to the originating party. You're not the first man to come in here with that problem." Just like that. No drama in it. I stood there a moment. I'd half expected to fight for that information, the way you have to fight for most things in a new county when people have already decided who you are. "What do I do about it?" I said. "You write to the state land office in the capital, reference filing 714B, and you ask for the corrected instrument. I can help you word it if you want. It won't be fast, but it'll be right." I said I'd be grateful for that. She pulled a sheet of paper from a drawer and wrote 4 lines in a plain, quick hand and slid it across the counter. "Take that to whatever attorney you're using. Or if you don't have one, Harlan Messer on Plum Street is honest." I took the paper. "Thank you, Miss Prout," she said, and went back to her manifests. I stood in the doorway a moment longer than I needed to. Outside it was gray and cold, and the wind had turned mean. I folded the paper and put it inside my coat. I went to Harlan Messer. He was honest, like she said. He looked at the 4 lines she'd written, looked at me and said, "She tell you to come here?" "She did." He nodded slowly, like something had been confirmed. "She's the sharpest person in this county. She just doesn't make a noise about it." That stayed with me. I wasn't sure why. The Broken Horn needed everything. The house on it was a 2-room structure that had been built by a man who'd given up on it 3 seasons in, and the outbuildings were worse. I had Goodman Tedrow, who'd ridden up from the south with me and knew cattle the way some men know scripture, and a wrangler named Das who didn't talk much but worked like 2. I had the herd, what was left of it, and I had the land, even if the deed was wrong, and I had the thing I'd always had, which was the ability to see what a piece of ground needed and not flinch from giving it. I wintered hard, lost 2 more head to a cold snap in December that came in sideways from the north and didn't leave for 11 days. The water line to the barn froze and burst, and I spent 3 days in temperatures that would stop a clock crawling under the house to replace pipe. I ate what I had, which wasn't much, and I kept my men paid, which left me less, and I went into January thin and tired and still not known by more than 6 people in the county. The men in Ardmore who had landed, the old families, Ketterman and Burke and the Saul brothers, they watched me the way they'd watched every newcomer, waiting to see if I'd fold. They were polite enough to my face. That's the one thing about the frontier. Most men are polite to your face. It's everything else that tells you where you stand. I stood outside it. I knew it. They had their council and their water agreements and their history together, and I had a deed with an error and a herd down to 763, and a house that leaked when the wind came from the southeast. I went to the post office maybe twice a month for the first few months. Usually for mail, I had correspondence with a buyer in Abilene, and Tedro had family he wrote to, and there were business matters that came in on the wire. I didn't go to talk. I am not a man who talks for the sake of it. But she was not talkative exactly. Precise. She would give you exactly as many words as the situation required, and the words were usually worth having. One afternoon in February I came in with Tedro's outgoing letter and a wire query about spring beef prices, and she had a man at the counter ahead of me, one of the Saul brothers, the older one. He was loud in the way some men are loud when they want witnesses, talking over her, telling her the wire she'd sent last week for him had gone to the wrong office, and it had cost him a deal, and whose fault was it, and what was she going to do about it? She let him finish. Then she opened the log, turned it to face him, pointed to a line and said, "You gave me that address. That's your handwriting. If the deal fell through, it's not because of my wire." The Saul brother's face changed. He grabbed the log, looked at it, put it down, didn't apologize, walked out. She watched him go, then turned to me like nothing had happened. "What do you need?" I handed over the wire query. She took it, read it, made a note. "I'll send this afternoon. Answer'll probably come back in 2-3 days." "You handle that kind of thing often," I said. "I don't know why I asked." She looked up. "Which kind?" "Men telling you something's your fault when it isn't." She considered that. "Often enough," she said. "You get used to it." "That's a poor deal," I said. She looked at me a moment, not warm, not cold, just level, and then the corner of her mouth moved just barely. "It is," she said, "but here I am." She went back to the wire. I stood there a second, then went out. March, the land office letter came. The correction was real, and the boundary was being restored, and there would be a formal instrument within 60 days. I read it 3 times standing at the counter while she waited, because I could feel something in my chest loosen that had been tight since October. "Good news," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Boundaries fixed," I said. She nodded. "I expected it would be. The filing was clear once you knew where to look. You knew it would come out right." "I thought it was likely." She tilted her head slightly. "You seemed like a man who could wait." I looked at her. She was writing something in the ledger, not looking at me. Her hair was brown going gray at the temple, pinned up plain. Her hands were steady. I said thank you, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in a while, and I went out into the March cold and stood there a minute before I got on my horse. Spring came in fast that year. The creek ran high. I bought another 140 head from a man out of Cottonwood who was getting out, drove them up myself with Tedro and Das, and by mid-April the broken horn was the thing I'd seen in my head when I put my money down. Not finished, a place like that is never finished, but itself. Real. The Kettermans invited me to a supper in April. I'm not sure what changed, maybe the deed correction, maybe the herd, maybe just time passing, but I went. And I sat at a table with the old families and ate their food and answered their questions. And by the end of the evening, I had an invitation to join the water board and a handshake from old Burke that meant something, though I wasn't sure yet what. I rode home thinking about Cecilia Prout. Not in the way a man thinks about a woman he wants something from, more like the way you think about a thing you've been overlooking that you suddenly notice is load-bearing. She'd been there, every piece of it. The deed, the attorney, the wire, the quiet way she'd handled the Saul brother. And she'd never asked anything of me for any of it, never referenced it afterward, never positioned herself as someone who'd helped me. I thought about that a long time. I started going to the post office when I didn't have mail. I told myself there was always something to send or receive, and there was, often enough that I could make the case to myself. But I knew what I was doing, or I started to know, which is a slower thing. She noticed, or I think she noticed, it was hard to say with her. She didn't change the way she treated me, which is to say she was direct and even and gave me the information I came for. But sometimes she would offer a thing I hadn't asked for. A note about a freight delay that would affect feed orders. A mention of a legal notice she'd seen that touched on grazing rights in the North County. Small things, practical things, things she knew I'd want. One day in May she said, without looking up from what she was doing, "The Ketterman girl is apparently being put forward for you." I stopped. "I'm sorry." "Martha Ketterman." Her mother asked me if I'd noticed whether you seemed attached to anyone. She set down her pen. I told her I hadn't noticed particularly, which is true. I don't notice that kind of thing as a rule. "What kind of thing?" I said. I don't know why I said it, it just came out. She looked at me then, level, honest. "Whether a man is available," she said, "it's not really my business." She held my eyes for a moment, and then went back to work. I stood there with my hat in my hands. I'm not a man who gets flustered, as a general principle. I have been in situations that required a clear head, and I have generally kept mine. But I stood in that post office for what felt like too long before I said something about needing to check on a wire and got out. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the bed in that two-room house. I'd fixed it by then, put in better windows, gotten the roof right, and I looked at the ceiling and thought about what I was doing. I was 45 years old. I'd been married once, young, and my wife had died of fever before we'd had 2 years together, and I had not been close to a woman since in any way that mattered. Not for lack of chances, more because the chances had been the wrong kind. Women who wanted what I might become, or what I had, not what I was. I'd grown a good eye for that particular thing. Cecilia Pruitt had never looked at me like I was a future. She'd looked at me like I was a man who needed information, and she had it. That's different. That's rarer than it should be. I thought about the Ketterman girl, Martha. I'd met her twice. She was 28 and pleasant and had a laugh that carried. There was nothing wrong with her. She'd make some man a good wife. I thought about Cecilia Pruitt handling the Saul brother. The 4 words she'd written in a plain hand and slid across a counter in October. The way she'd said, "But here I am," like it was just a fact about the world that she'd made her peace with. I had Tedrow's help the next day moving fence line on the east pasture, and I worked hard enough that I didn't have to think, which is one of the things I've always used hard work for. By evening I was worn through and my hands ached, and I had about 6 thoughts in my head, and I let myself have them one at a time. The first was, I am going to go talk to her. The second was, not about the mail. The third through 6th don't need to be said. I went in on a Thursday. Late morning, the hour when the freight rush was done, and before the afternoon wire came in. She was alone, setting out a sorted run of letters into the row of brass-fronted boxes behind the counter. She heard the bell above the door and said, without turning, "I'll be right with you." "Take your time," I said. She turned then, looked at me. Whatever she saw in my face, something in hers went still. "I don't have mail today," I said. "I know," she said. "You picked it up Tuesday. I came to ask you something." She set down the stack of letters in her hand slowly and put both hands flat on the counter, waiting. She had the kind of face that didn't pretend. It didn't move toward you or away from you. It just held still and let you come to whatever you were going to say. "I've been in this county 8 months," I said. "I came in with a broken deed and a hard winter ahead of me and not a friend to my name. You were the first person who helped me and the only one who helped me without wanting anything for it." She didn't say anything. "I don't know how you'd take this," I said, "and I understand if it's not something you'd consider, but I'd like to court you, Miss Prout, if you're willing." Something crossed her face. Not surprise, exactly, more like a door opening inside it, a thing she'd kept shut for a long time. "Cecilia," she said, "I'm sorry. If you're asking to court me, you can call me Cecilia." I stood there a moment, then I said, "I'm Holt." She almost smiled, almost. "I know who you are, Holt. I've known who you are since October." "Is that a yes?" She looked at me, not at what I had, not at what I might become, at me, and something settled in her face. Not soft, sure. "That's a yes," she said. We courted slow. I am not a man built for rushing that kind of thing, and she didn't want it rushed, which is one of the many things I came to understand about her. She was careful. Not cold, careful. She'd been overlooked so long she'd learned to keep herself back until she was certain, and I respected that in her the way I'd respect a good fence that didn't give until it was supposed to. We walked mostly. Sunday afternoons, when the post office was closed and she had a few hours. She knew the land around Ardmore the way a person knows a place they've lived 45 years, every small feature of it, every name. She'd tell me things about the country that I'd have taken years to learn on my own. The old creek channel that ran under the north boundary, dry now, but you could still find the gravel bed if you knew where to look. The family that had tried to farm the flats east of town in the dry years and failed and left, and whose ghosts everybody in Ardmore still thought about when the weather turned hot. The history of the place, quiet and specific, the way only someone who'd read every letter that passed through a county for 20 years would know it. She'd been postmistress since she was 25. Her father had held the position before her and had taught her the work, and when he died she'd taken it over without anyone asking whether she wanted it or could do it. She'd just done it. The county paid her what they paid a man in the same role, which was not enough, and she'd supplemented it for years by doing ledger work for 2 of the merchants, which she still did on winter evenings. She didn't tell me any of this in a sitting. It came in pieces, over weeks, the way a person tells you about their life when they're deciding you can be trusted with it. In June, after a Sunday walk along the North Creek bed, we sat on a flat rock above the dry channel and she said, "Why me? There are women half my age in this county." I looked at the dry creek. There were cottonwoods along it, old ones, their roots down to whatever water still ran underground, and they were full of leaves that moved in the afternoon air. "Because you looked at me plain," I said. "In October, first day I walked in. You looked at me like I was just a man who might need something, not like I was a problem or an opportunity." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a small thing to base a courtship on," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but I don't think it was a small thing you did. I think it cost you some habit to do it." She looked at the cottonwoods. Something in her throat moved. "It did," she said. I asked her in August. "Not on a walk?" "In the post office, because that's where it had started and it seemed right. I came in on a Thursday morning, same hour, and she looked up and whatever she saw in my face told her, because her hands went still on what she was holding. I said, "I'd like you to marry me if you're willing. I'm not a young man and I'm not a rich one, though the ranch is doing well and I expect it to do better. I can't promise you easy. I can promise you I will be faithful and I will work hard and I will never once wonder whether I got the better end of this deal, because I know I will have." She looked at me a long time, long enough that I felt it, the weight of it, her deciding. And I held still under it because a good decision made carefully is worth more than a quick one, and because I'd meant what I said and I didn't need to add to it. Then she came around the counter. She came around the counter and she put both hands flat against my chest, the way you'd put your hands on something to feel whether it was solid, and she looked up at me. She was not a small woman. She was nearly my height, and she looked me straight in the face, and her eyes were clear and dark and not performing anything. "You'll have to talk to Mayor Hensley about a temporary postmistress," she said. "He'll complain about it. Just let him complain." My hands came up and covered hers. She was warm through the fabric of my shirt. "All right," I said. "And I keep the ledger work," she said. "The merchants need it, and I'm good at it." "I know you are." She held still a moment more, and then something in her, something she'd held back a long time, the way a careful person holds things back until they're sure, came forward. She leaned her forehead against my collarbone. Not dramatic, just done deciding. I put my arms around her, there in the post office, in the middle of the morning. We were married in September, before the first frost. Harlan Messer stood up for me, which surprised me and shouldn't have. Tedro and Das came in clean shirts and stood in the back of the church, and old Burke came with his wife, and even the Kettermans came, and Martha, the girl who'd been put forward for me, shook my hand after and seemed genuinely glad, which told me something good about her. The Saul brothers did not come, but nobody expected them to. The preacher was a young man who'd come to Ardmore the previous winter and was still finding his footing, and he was nervous and gave a longer ceremony than necessary. But Cecilia stood beside me through all of it without moving, her hand in mine, looking at the preacher with the same level patience she gave every situation that required waiting. I looked at her sideways once, partway through. She looked back, and for just a second her mouth moved at the corner, the almost smile I'd come to know. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. "We have been married 4 years now. The Broken Horn is a different place. Not because of her, not exactly, she didn't change the ranch. She isn't that kind of woman, she wouldn't presume. But having a person who is yours, who chose you with her eyes open and hasn't once suggested she wishes otherwise, that changes you. And a changed man runs a changed ranch. I sleep better. I work the same, but I sleep better. She still runs the post office. She wanted to, and I never had any thought of stopping her. The county finally got her a part-time assistant last year, a young woman named Fenn who is quick, and who Cecilia is teaching the way her father taught her. I go by sometimes when I'm in town, and I walk in and she looks up from whatever she's doing and she looks at me plain, the same way she did that first October morning, except now there's something behind it that there wasn't then. There are men in this county who still look at me a certain way. New Cattle Baron is what they call me, though I've been here nearly 5 years now, and I didn't inherit anything or marry into anything, and nobody handed me a deed that was right. I built the Broken Horn out of bad luck and hard winters, and the kind of stubbornness that my mother used to say was the only thing I'd ever been reliably good at. They can call me what they like. Last week I came in from the north pasture at evening, grime in my collar and my hands raw from a fence repair that had gone longer than expected, and the light was going orange and low the way it does in September, and Cecilia was on the porch of the house, our house now, though it's mine, that she walked into with a cup of coffee in her hand, and she was looking out at the light on the flats. I tied the horse and walked up. She didn't turn, she just held out the cup. I sat down beside her and took it and drank from it and gave it back, and she wrapped both hands around it again, and we sat there and watched the light go. The cottonwoods along the North Creek caught the last of it and went gold, and somewhere on the flats one of the cattle called once and then went quiet. Neither of us said anything. That's the thing about a woman who chose you clean. There's nothing left to prove. The land's yours and she's beside you and the evening's coming in, and that's the whole of it. That's more than I knew how to ask for 10 years ago, more than I knew to want. The light went and the first stars came, and she leaned, just a small weight of her shoulder against my arm, and we stayed there until the cold came in off the flats and we went inside together, and I closed the door behind us on all of it.